All right, guys, so let's go ahead and take a look at the muscles of the pelvis and the thigh. So this this lecture should be pretty easy because all of these muscles basically come in groups. So it makes it nice and easy to package them together and understand all of their functions together with each other. So let's go ahead and look at our first muscle group. Now, I'm sure you're well aware of quite a few muscle groups in the thigh, one of which is the quads, right? We all have heard quads. You want to work out your quads and do this with your quads and blah, 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 quads. So what exactly is the quads? Well, quads is short for quadriceps. And as we've seen before, sep derives from cephalon, meaning head. Quad is four. So this means this is four heads or four parts of this muscle itself, of this muscle group. So the quadriceps muscle group has four muscles in it. Now let's go ahead and break them down. Let's look at the easy ones and knock those out first. So the first three of the quadriceps group we're looking at are pretty easy. They all have vastus in front of their name. V-A-S-T-U-S, vastus. So the vastus muscles are named afterwards by their orientation on the thigh. So we have vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius, and vastus medialis. So obviously vastus lateralis is on the lateral side of the femur. Vastus intermedius is in between those muscles and straight dead center on the femur, while vastus medialis is on the medial side of the femur. So all of those muscles originate, like we said, on the femur in their respective spot, and then they insert onto the common quadriceps tendon. This common quadriceps tendon is the big tendon that runs over your kneecap, and this is actually the tendon in which your patella develops in. So just looking at these muscles for now, we can see that when these muscles contract and they cross over the knee, they're going to help to extend the knee. They're basically going to kick the knee out. They're going to straighten the leg. So they're going to straighten the leg. So if this is go on, Dex, you need to be a little more flexible than this. So if this is a flexed knee, they extend the knee much like this. So this is extension of the knee for the vastus group. Now, the fourth muscle in this group is pretty important. We call this one the rectus femoris. The rectus femoris. So this one's completely different from the rest of them in the group, and we'll see why. So one, breaking down the name, rectus meaning running straight up. Femoris. So this helps to keep the femur straight up. So first, we need to understand that this muscle crosses two joints as opposed to the other three which only crossed the knee joint. So the rectus femoris originates on the AIIS, the anterior inferior iliac spine, and then runs down to insert with the rest of its friends on that common quadriceps tendon. So clearly we can see if it's inserting on that common quadriceps tendon that the rectus femoris is going to extend that knee. So again, we're going to kick that knee out, right? So being that this muscle crosses the hip joint as well, it's going to act on the hip as well. So what exactly is the rectus femoris going to do? Well, if we attach this muscle from the ASIS all the way down past the knee and pull this string together, well, it's going to flex forward the hip. It's going to flex the knee forward or flex the hip forward and then extend the knee. So while the rest of the group will only bring the knee from flexion to extension, so this is what the vastus group does, vastus intermedius, vastus lateralis, and vastus medialis, all they do is extend the knee, while the rectus femoris flexes the hip and extends the knee. So it does the can-can. So rectus femoris, rest of the group. Rectus femoris and the rest of the group. Now, the other major muscle group, so we can say that these muscles were the extensors of the knee and flexors of the hip, right? So we can say these are the extensors of the knee. So we're going to look at the muscle group on the back of the thigh that helps with flexion of the knee. I'm sure most of you have heard of this group and you're probably already thinking of it right now. We're talking about the hamstring muscle group. So we turn decks around to look at the hamstring muscle group. So first, the commonality of all these muscles, we'll say for sakes of ease and convenience, is they come from the ischial tuberosity. That is what I'm sitting on right now. These are the bones that I'm sitting on, the sits bones as we call them, the ischial tuberosities. These are the bumps on your butt. Now the ischial tuberosity is their origin point, and now we're going to look at the insertion points. So we have three muscles in this group. We have the biceps femoris, the biceps femoris, so biceps two-headed muscle. So we have a biceps femoris, a biceps in the leg, and a biceps in the arm. Don't confuse the two. Biceps femoris is in the hamstring group. And then we also have semitendinosus and semimembranosus. So the important thing to remember is which of these muscles is lateral and which of these muscles is most medial, and then which is the one in between. So the order of these muscles, pay very, very, very close attention to this. The order of these muscles from lateral to medial is biceps femoris, semitendinosus, and semimembranosus. Again, the order from lateral to medial is biceps femoris, semitendinosus, and semimembranosus. So with that said, where do our muscles insert onto? Well, the biceps femoris comes out to the lateral side of the femur. So it inserts onto the tibia, which we'll see next week. So it inserts onto the tibia, so it's on the lateral side of the leg, while the other two insert on the medial side of the tibia and they cross the knee. So what are these muscles going to do? Well, clearly if we brought the string together, well, we're going to, one, extend the hip itself. We're going to bring the hip back into extension. So looking at them from the side, we're bringing the hip back for extension. So we're going to get ready to kick that ball. So boom, we're going to bring the leg back for extension, and then all of the muscles of the hamstring group will flex the knee. So they extend the leg and flex the knee. And then the quads are going to bring the leg back forward, as well as the other hip flexors, and then straighten the knee out for that kick of the football or soccer ball or football. So again, recapping those hamstring muscles, we have three in the group. We have the biceps femoris, we have the semitendinosus and the semimembranosus. The order from the lateral to medial is biceps femoris, most lateral, semitendinosus, the intermediate, and then semimembranosus, the most medial. All of these muscles originate on the ischial tuberosity, and then they cross the knee. Biceps femoris is lateral, while the semitendinosus and membranosus are on the medial side. They will all collectively extend the hip and flex the knee. Again, they extend the hip and flex the knee. So the next muscles we're looking at are the adductor groups. So the adductor muscles. Well, I'm sure you can guess it from their name. Well, the adductor muscles adduct the thigh. They bring the hip in for adduction. So they're going to bring the hip in. They're going to bring the hip in. Now, we have three muscles that are easily understood as adductors because they have adductor in their name. We have adductor magnus, which means the biggest adductor, adductor magnus. We have adductor longus, which is a very long adductor, and then adductor brevis. Now, other adductor muscles are gracilis and pectineus, tiny little pectineus. Now, let's look at these muscles. They all insert on the pubis. So, as we see with groin strain and pain, the adductor muscles are usually, or adductor strain, it's any number of these muscles. And that's why we feel pain in the groin when we pull one of these muscles, because they attach to the pubis. They attach right here at the pubic region, part of the pelvis, and then they just all insert in various places. So think that if a muscle is really big, it's going to go a lot farther, while if a muscle is really tiny, like pectineus or adductor brevis, they're going to be a lot higher up in the thigh. Now, the one that we're really going to pay attention to is gracilis. Gracilis comes down and then attaches onto what we call the pes anserinus insertion. We'll look at that later. So basically, it's attaching to the medial side of the tibia. So gracilis attaches to the medial side of the tibia. So remember, all of these adductor muscles, just remembering their names is good enough. And knowing that they're an adductor, they're going to do adduction. So very simple. Now, we see these adductors. So let's look at some other muscles that might help with abduction. So one is the tensor fasciae latae, the TFL as we call it, tensor fasciae latae as it's spelt. So it's the coffee of the body. The tensor fasciae latae, tensor fasciae latae, is a muscle that attaches right here to the posterior part of the iliac crest. And then the tensor fasciae latae merges into what we call the iliotibial band, or the ITB, right? We've all heard of that, the ITB. My ITB is tight, my ITB this, my ITB that. The iliotibial band, or iliotibial tract. That name tells you where it's going. It's coming from the ilium of the pelvis to the tibia, iliotibial band. So this is a big sheet of connective tissue that runs the lateral side of your thigh from the ilium down to the tibia. So tensor fasciae latae, TFL, inserts onto the ITB, iliotibial band. The next muscle we're looking at is called Sartorius. So we call this muscle, some people call it the talar muscle. It allows us to cross our leg over. Basically, if you cross your leg in this fashion, that's the actions of this muscle, and that could give you all you need to know. So I also like to call this the Biggie Smalls muscle, or Sartorius, right? I know it's horrible, I'm sorry, but hate me in the comments. So where does the Sartorius come from? Well, again, this is an important muscle we're going to look at because, one, it comes from the ASIS, or the anterior superior iliac spine. So it comes from the pelvis here. So that means we're going to cross the hip joint. Then it inserts onto, it wraps around the front of the body and inserts onto the medial aspect of the tibia, that pes anserinus insertion. That's the second time we've seen it in this video. So that means that the pes anserine common tendon is a tendon of 3 different muscles. And we've seen one, which is gracilis, and now we're seeing Sartorius. We've actually already seen another, we just didn't mention it. We're looking at semitendinosus. So semitendinosus, gracilis, and Sartorius make the pes anserine insertion. Now let's look at the actions of this muscle. We can see that if it contracts, it's going to flex the hip. When it contracts, it's going to rotate the hip outward, external rotation of the hip, and then it'll even bring it across for adduction. So that gives us that full action of bringing our hips, our hip into that cross-legged position, basically crossing our leg across our body for that cross-legged position. So Sartorius, ASIS, down to the pes anserine insertion, and then basically crosses the muscle in that fancy fashion. So let's look at some big muscles on the back of our body. So some big muscles on the back of our body. These also counteract, these are kind of the counteractors of the adductor group. We have the gluteal group. So the gluteal group. So let's look at these muscles in the gluteal group here. Now, we have 3 parts. We have a Gluteus Maximus, which means the biggest, Maximus, and this is actually the muscle that is your butt. So that's the muscle you want to give a little squeeze. And we have the gluteus medius and gluteus minimus. So gluteus medius is like the middle child. Gluteus minimus is the third child, the youngest child. So gluteus maximus is the largest, and then gluteus medius and minimus are a lot smaller. So gluteus maximus is a much broader muscle and covers a lot of area. It basically covers all throughout most of the iliac crest here, attaches to the sacrum and to the coccyx, and then it reaches out and actually inserts onto the iliotibial band and parts of the femur itself. So the gluteus maximus is essentially responsible for one, extension of the leg. It's going to extension of the hip. It also helps to externally rotate, as well as it's also going to abduct the thigh. So again, gluteus maximus, very broad base of contact and origin. So iliac crest, sacrum, and coccyx, inserting onto the ITB, the iliotibial band and parts of the femur. Again, it's going to bring the leg into extension. It's going to externally rotate the hip. It's going to abduct the thigh. And a fun fact of this muscle is it actually counteracts itself with adduction and abduction, because at a certain range of motion, it'll actually bring the thigh closer back to itself. So it's going to bring the thigh out and then back in. It's basically swinging it out. Dex, you need some more flexibility. We need to get you in some yoga. So basically it's doing this. So this little action right there. Now the gluteus medius and gluteus minimus, those ones are pretty simple. They're just essentially straight abductors of the thigh. They come from the gluteal surface of the ilium here and then insert onto essentially the greater trochanter. So gluteus medius, gluteus minimus, they're basically the abductors of the thigh itself. So they're just going to bring it out for abduction. They have other micro movements, but we're not going to pay too much attention to it. Now, the last muscle, second to last muscle we're going to look at is the piriformis, which we can group up with the glute muscles as well. So the piriformis, which I'm pretty sure most people have heard of, piriformis is that muscle that's usually responsible for impinging the sciatic nerve or irritating that sciatic nerve. So it comes from part of the coccyx or sacrum here and then inserts onto the greater trochanter of the femur here. And then when it contracts, it's going to externally rotate the hip. So that's its main function there, external rotation of the hip joint. But you can see that its path runs pretty deep and actually runs right where the sciatic nerves come underneath it. So this is why this muscle is highly responsible for irritation of the sciatic nerve, or what we might call piriformis syndrome. So piriformis, sciatic nerve, they go hand in hand almost when you talk about them. Now, the very last muscle group we're looking at is actually a grouped group of muscles called the Iliopsoas muscle group. So the three muscles in this group are the Iliacus, Psoas Major, and Psoas Minor. So Iliacus, right? We've seen a landmark that's specifically designated for that, the iliac fossa. Iliacus sits in this iliac fossa. Iliacus, iliac fossa. Then it attaches onto the transverse processes and the bodies of the lumbar vertebrae, essentially. Now, the other parts of the muscle group here are the Psoas Major and Psoas Minor. Psoas Major and Psoas Minor come from this lesser trochanter right here, and then boom, comes straight up through and attach to the bodies of the vertebrae. So we can see that these muscles are responsible for flexion of the thigh. So these are the main flexors of the hip. So our Iliopsoas group are our hip flexors, of course, with the addition of Rectus Femoris helping to also flex the hip as well. So Iliopsoas group are our hip flexors. Iliacus coming from the iliac fossa, coming to the bodies of the lumbar vertebrae, and then the psoas major and minor coming from the lesser trochanter, coming up to the bodies of those vertebrae to flex the hip itself. So guys, I think that's going to do it for us on these muscles. Take your notes, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great day.